Welcome everyone to our ACCA SBL June 2025 pre-scene analysis. That is for the company Darren Shoes Limited. My name is James Wright. I'm an ACCA qualified member, and in today's session, I'm going to be taking you through all of my insights from the pre-scene materials to help you out to get the 50 plus. As you are aware, we are doing today's session in collaboration with Learnsignal, so be sure to connect with myself and Learnsignal on all the social media channels. And if you have any questions and you're watching the recording back, leave us a comment down below. All the details of the pre-scene are in the description. We would love to hear how you're getting on. So you've got the usual Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. Keep in touch and let us know if today's insights help you to get that 50 plus. For the students who are joining us live, we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the session, which again will be part of the recording. So please feel free to use the Q&A section on the dashboard, and I will go through all of those at the end. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can get in touch with the Learnsignal team as well. But without any further ado, let's get stuck in to a nice little overview of the pre-scene information, telling us about the company, the environment, the overall industry. The first key thing for you to get down in your notes, which will be a reason why you will pass your SBL exam, is that if I'm marking an SBL script, you have to apply the scenario to your answers that are set on the exam day. So whatever the requirement throws at you, you've got to take the information we're given in the pre-scene materials, the information that we're given on the exam day, apply this in your requirement that is set, and you've got a very good chance of passing on there. So in terms of actually going through the pre-scene materials, and maybe you're a bit old school like me, where you've got a hard copy as well. When I was an ACCA student, I used to break down my notes and separate them out section by section. And trust me on this, I've spent the last 48 hours going through these pre-scene notes. There are a lot of areas in the Darren Shoes Limited case study that overlaps with different areas of the syllabus and different areas of the contents. So maybe breaking it up actually section by section is definitely going to help you out to manage which part you are going to refer to. Because the next thing to note down is on that exam day, you have not got time to be going back to the pre-scene notes, back to the requirement, anything on the exam day that you've got to read for the first time. You've not got time to be going through all of the pre-scene notes in a lot of detail. You've got to know exactly where the figures or that key quote that you want to directly reference is, because it is such a time-pressured exam. You've got to be really on the ball, and that is what is going to be the difference in getting you the pass. There are some areas that are absolutely key for the SBL syllabus. And again, the slides and the recording will be sent out to students of Learnsignal after this. But if you have any questions, be sure to let me know. Some of the theories which come up in the SBL syllabus that overlap to corporate governance. We are given a lot about stakeholders in the pre-scene notes. If you have a copy to hand, feel free to go to page 8 in your pre-scene notes. That is where we're given a list of some of the stakeholders, such as we've given the third-party manufacturer, we've got a distribution partner, we've got the Luckland Shoe Association. These are the specifics that you need to be applying it to. And we've got, of course, the likes of the shareholders and the employees, breaking it down both from an internal and an external point of view. Agency theory is another interesting one about examining the relationship between the principals, those are the shareholders, which again, if anyone has the hard copy in front of them, please feel free to go to page 7. That's where we're given that Dearn has a share ownership of founding family of 70% on there. And also the agents, where we have to work out any conflicts that arise. So these are the directors and the managers who own 15% of the organization. They have different ideas about how the business should be run, and there can be conflicts. Again, another area that you could refer to, and there are links in the pre-scene materials. Last but by no means least, we have corporate social responsibility, the concept of a business actually having responsibility in how they actually operate. And we're given hints in the pre-scene materials as to the environmental impact of how the shoes are actually made. And this is where, again, we're given hints throughout, but if you go to the actual back on the risk register. This is on page 12 now. And we're told on there that in the last sentence, we're told that the environmental impact of the shoe industry and the customer's reaction to it is on the risk register and an area that the directors need to be paying attention to. So again, links into CSR that if they're not operating sustainably and effectively, that is going to impact on the organization. So quite a lot already, and we're only on slide 1. We're now coming on to the professional skills areas and how it links into the application of the scenario. Now, for your notes, most students are quite good at the analysis. That's where you can get a sort of SWOT analysis that comes into it, the pros and the cons, the fors and the against. The other areas of evaluation coming to a actual outcome that we're looking for as to should they change the strategy? Should they actually go back to just making their shoes in Luckland, for example? And communicating that effectively with paragraphs is, again, going to be another area of your exam technique that is going to build up on the marks. Another thing for you to get down to help you out to pass your SBL exam is, for example, from a communication point of view, a marker is not wanting to see a full page of just your answer all in one block. Take, for example, if you've got a 8-mark question, what a marker is looking for there is a student's picked up on that it's 8 marks. It's going to be 2 marks per paragraph for some well-developed points, maximum 3 sentences, I would say, on there to make sure it's well-developed. So what you should have for that example is 1 paragraph, leave a line, bit of space, 2nd paragraph, leave a line, bit of space, and the same for the 3rd and 4th paragraph. And what you're doing there is you're saying to the marker, come on, for that 1st paragraph, can you give me 2 marks? Or if it's not worth 2, could you give me maybe 1? Which is a far better approach than a actual marker having to go through a full page on there and then going, oh gosh, can I fish out a mark? Is there, what about this? Clear paragraphs and communicating it effectively will get you the professional skills marks and make your answers stand out. So make sure you get it down and put it into practice with your mock exams. The 2 professional skills mark areas that students really fall down on are commercial acumen and skepticism. This is where for skepticism, the key word is to challenge. That's challenge what is set in the requirement and link it back to the scenario. And commercial acumen is all about applying the scenario and the product or service that is provided. So in this case, it's all about shoes. And you'll see going through the pre-seed materials, it goes through the process of actually, is it handcrafted? Is it mass produced on there? They've got the shoe manufacturing process of cutting, stitching, lasting and finishing on page 3. And all I have down in my notes is, I've never made a pair of shoes in my life. I don't know much about making shoes, but I've got to have a decent idea about the processes, the time frames, the materials. These are all massive important things that you need to apply the scenario in your answers, and that is what is going to get you the marks on there. Applying your commercial acumen, understanding the industry. Now we're coming on to the ACCA Code of Ethics and it linking into corporate governance as well. Now, of course, you'll have seen integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, professional behaviour, and professional competence and due care in your previous exams. Now, why is this important? Well, in the ACCA website, you will see on the SBL side that if you've completed your ethics and professional skills module, you are actually 20 to 30% more likely to pass the exam. Now, if you're watching this recording or you're joining us live and you've got the exam in 2 weeks' time, or less than 2 weeks' time, shall I say, there is no point in you doing that ethics and professional skills module now. But it's if you're doing it in the future, maybe you're watching this and thinking, how can I prepare better? That is what you should be thinking of. So there will be some ethics in the exam. We are told it has to be embedded in the examination. And then you've got to think, well, where could it possibly come up? Now, again, linking back to those key stakeholder groups, and I don't have a crystal ball. I should have said that at the start of the recording. But there are hints and areas that you go, that has a better chance of being tested from an ethical point of view. Now, if you go to page 8 for those key stakeholder groups, we're told about a trade union called the NSU there. So that's the NSU. And if you go to page 6, that is where we have it called as the National Shoe Union. And it talks about members of their negotiating agreements, employers on their pay and conditions, really linking into, well, if something's going to go wrong with the staff who work at this shoe organization, then the union could get involved and it could be an ethical point of view. Now, how could it link into the likes of corporate governance and areas that could be linked to ethics? Well, we have a chief human resources officer in charge of the HR functions. That is on page 9. And then in terms of good corporate governance, this is to do with the executive chair, also on page 9. The key bit for your notes is that we're not actually given any of the names for any of these officers. So it's well worth noting that down, that it could come up on the exam day, some specific names, and it's not to panic. You've just got to work out which role they are fulfilling on there. And lastly, in terms of an ethics point of view, we're told that on page 7, Dearn is not listed on the Luckland Stock Exchange, but they have governance arrangements that are consistent with good corporate governance on there. They don't have an ethics committee that we're told about. So all of these little factors that it's not a listed company. However, if you have a look on page 12, this company makes, in terms of revenue, over $350 million a year. So you've got to say to yourself, hang on a second, something could potentially come up there from an ethical point of view, and I might be able to pivot some of those key things from the pre-seen materials to help my answers out. So now let's go through the pre-seen materials sort of section by section and some of the key areas that you've just got to be aware of to have in your arsenal going on to that exam day. And in terms of where I think students are going to make mistakes in terms of Darren Shoes Limited, is that it manufactures and also sells shoes. So when you're talking about it and the company, you've got to talk about the heritage. It's over 100 years old, and the fact that it both manufactures and sells shoes. And it's the 4th largest shoe manufacturer with a share capital percentage of just over 9% there. In terms of PESTEL factors, we're told that it's politically stable from an economic and political point of view. So again, lots of things to discuss from the introduction. We then get on to the industry itself, with there being different market sort of segments on there and the different revenue streams. So they have the outlets, the online stores, and this is where it could develop into a SWOT analysis that they don't really go into too much leverage of looking at the online sales, and also from a exporting point of view that we'll come on to later on. So some of the key factors on here that link into some of the theories, like the different stakeholder groups, we've got PESTEL analysis on there about how the leather shoes are actually produced, which also include plastics. These are the specific details of the scenario that if a PESTEL analysis was to be tested and you're discussing environmental factors, be really specific on those key facts and figures. Speaking of which, we're told about the revenue for 2004. We're also told about the average annual growth has been 1.71%, and that it's actually expected for the next 5 years to be 1.06. So it's not actually as prosperous moving forward. It's sort of flatlining, and that's where, in terms of the organization there for Darren Shoes Limited, they're going to have to get more savvy with how they market themselves and what direction they go. We're told that Dearn has 9.4% of the market share on page 12, so they are part of the 45% of the market where we have these 5 big players. It's coming on later on where we're going to see these in a bit more action, but those 5 key names of Flamingo, Rego, Parish, Dearn as the company we're representing, and Betterby are absolutely fundamental names that you need to get down, that any of those could be applied in a requirement on your exam day. We then come on to areas such as the production now, and we're told that Dearn does both ways, mass production and handcrafted shoes. You'll see that I put, you don't need to be a shoemaking expert on there, and you've just got to have an understanding of how the industry operates and the production functions. But whilst we're talking about mass production techniques and being handcrafted, the key bit here is that there is a greater demand and higher margins in handcrafted shoes that we're told about in the pre-seen materials. But it goes with the territory that if you are handcrafting shoes, there are going to be higher costs associated, but there could be more opportunities with this. In terms of the mass-produced shoes now, and this is where Dearn actually does this, we'll come on to it later on, but they have taken some of their actual production processes that are mass-produced, and they no longer do this wholly in the home country of Luckland. They've actually done this now in a external country called Totland. That is a major talking point, but definitely something to get down in your notes for you to look at, which if you're going through your notes or if you've got it to hand in front of you, this is where you need to have a look on page 7, and that is where we find the details for their strategy. In terms of the shoe manufacturing process, this is the same for if it's mass-produced or if it is handcrafted. Again, I was just getting down the 4 different stages, the key words being the cutting, stitching, lasting, and finishing that you could refer to in your answers. But the SBL marker is not going to test you on how a shoe is made. You've got to be looking at it and applying the process to a requirement from a business perspective. Now, in terms of how the mass production and it actually goes about it, so what we have on here is Luckland-based manufacturers traditionally produced all of their output in Luckland, but this is what Dearn used to do on there. So 15 years ago, they actually decided to move all of their production, apart from a small bit of handcrafted goods, overseas, and this is to take advantage of the lower production costs on there and get the finished goods transferred by a third party back into Luckland to be sold. So the reason for the change and why they went and did it was for the lower costs, and you'll see further details of that on page 7, where they transferred most of their manufacturing to Totland. So that is another country, not actual organization, just to be crystal clear, but another key word for you to get down that you need to be aware of. But the interesting one in terms of handcrafting the actual shoes now, where it's better quality, there are higher costs associated with making these handcrafted shoes on there. But the key point to get down in terms of the handmade shoes are that they are not outsourced and they are manufactured in Luckland. So different pricing strategy, different market segment that they are selling to. They've not been transferred to a third-party manufacturer and not been outsourced on there. And it's a case of the reason for that is, well, we're just told that's what they decided 15 years ago. If you have a look at your notes in terms of, and this is the key bit for you to get down, these handcrafted shoes that they are referring to, and this is a mistake that students are going to make on the exam day. If you go to page 10, the handcrafted shoes are the formal types of shoes on there. They are the formal types of shoes. And remember that company that we talked about where they are, we have the 5 largest. Parrish is one of them, and they are the market leader in formal shoes, which you can see on page 10. Semi-formal, casual, and children's shoes are all mass-produced. Darren Shoes Limited actually produces all 4 of those options. So you can see it can get slightly confusing, and students will make a mistake on that come the exam day. And like clockwork, just as I touched on it, this is the key point that only those formal shoes are the types of shoes that are not mass-produced on here. The key bit as well to make sure you get down is that Dearn Limited, or Darren Shoes Limited, should I say, makes all 4 types of shoes. The formal ones are the ones that are handcrafted. The rest are mass-produced on there. And this is where the 4 types of shoes are manufactured and sold in Luckland. We're already told about the information about those 5 large organisations and the smaller organisations that are set out in Table 2. And again, if you've got the actual notes in front of you, this is the key table broken down by the Learnsignal team. So if you go on to page 4, where we're at now, the key bits for you to get your head around on here for your notes are that we've got those 5 companies on the left-hand side. So the names you've seen before. We've got Rego, Flamingo, Darren Shoes Limited, so that's us, Parish and Betterby. And if you look at it from left to right, we're told back on page 2 that those 5 companies, the largest, account for 45% of the market share. So you can see the market share on the right-hand side, that Dearn has 9.4%, a key figure for you to remember for the exam day. But the thing that I sort of take away from this, from a Darren Shoes Limited point of view, that I'd get down in your notes, is I think that they're just doing too much. Remember, they actually produce all 4 types of shoes, and Dearn Limited actually compete basically with all of the companies here. The only sort of one which is a bit sort of different is Rego up at the top. They've got a target market for 18 to 30-year-olds. But I mean, maybe some of Dearn shoes might fit some of those. But again, I think it's worth noting that that could be another opportunity from a SWOT analysis point of view. It's a competitive marketplace where you've got to just bear in mind and use it to your advantage to apply from anything linking to a strategy question, that 55% of the market share, as you can see at the bottom, is all to do with smaller organizations. So you might get a couple of organizations that are sort of up and coming, and this could be applied on the exam day because they relate to both the adults and children's sections. They cater for all types of shoes manufactured on there. The last thing I would say for this slide on here is that you get the sense that Flamingo and Parish and Rego and Betterby, they've all sort of niched down into a particular area. Whereas Dearn Limited, when we read through a bit more of the pre-seen materials, you kind of go, are they doing too much? Are they trying to spread themselves too thin? These are the sort of things you could bring up in an evaluation and discussion question. Now, in terms of the shoe industry in Luckland, there are some very important figures that you just need to wrap your head around. And even when I read through this, I kind of went, oh my word, that could be a mistake on the horizon there. So just focus on the screen. I would say, first of all, can you see the 85% up at the top left-hand corner? This is where you need to know the breakdown of where that's come from and getting to the 100% of the revenue for the sales made in Luckland. So in the first paragraph, we're told that 60% of the total industry revenue is from the retail outlets. So offline sales, or picture in your mind the physical stores. Then we're told that from the 85%, so that 85 up at the top, or if I just read it again, 85% of the revenue earned by Luckland shoe manufacturers comes from the sales made in Luckland. So 60% relates to retail outlets, and the remaining 25% is all about the online sales in the second paragraph on there, with a final point meaning that organizations with an online offering do not make online sales out of Luckland. So a real SWOT analysis opportunity there. The last bit at the bottom is the remaining 15% now. So 15% of the revenue earned by Luckland-based shoe manufacturers was from exporting sales via distributors. Again, another opportunity. Formal shoes that Dearn and Parish make in page 10 on there are the handcrafted shoes. So this is where what we're saying here is Parish and Dearn use these exporters because it's predominantly for handcrafted shoes, and these are the only 2 of the major 5 companies that actually make handcrafted shoes. So now if we look at the shoe industry from another perspective, and you can see those percentages a bit more clearly, that's why we've taken them, but it's just to get your head around as to offline sales being in retail outlets. Again, close your eyes, think of a sort of bricks and mortar actual store. Then you've got the online sales, and then you've got the export sales for the remaining 15% using a provider on there. So again, just something not to make a silly mistake on. We're also given that there are challenges within the industry. Again, please don't rock up to your SBL exam thinking it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows. There are going to be things that are going to go wrong, and it's your job to remember the key details that you can see from some of the percentages on here. And I've highlighted that we've got some economic factors if it was going to relate to a PESTEL style question. We're also told factors about meeting the demand, and also Dearn sells mid-priced shoes that is going to be impacted by the economy slowing down. We're not told how long it takes in terms of actually how long it takes to make the new style of shoes, because in the past, price, product range, quality, marketing, brand name, we're told all these at the top were the important things that someone would buy from you. But now, because of the sort of the actual tastes and preferences and demands of customers, the speed to the market of the actual shoes is becoming more and more important. And remember those keywords that I said you've just got to remember? Well, Flamingo leads the way in this area, being able to design and produce and get those shoes ready to go out in just a few weeks. We're also told in the pre-seen materials that Darren Shoes Limited, actually, they take a few weeks or so to actually go through and review the actual styles. And therefore, in terms of from an innovation perspective, it's just taking too long. It's just far too long. They're not adapting quick enough on there. And if you look on page 10, it says about Dearn produces 20 styles of shoes as well. And it's a case of it just takes far too long for them to actually go through and make the new types of products. So again, it's just something to bear in mind for you to discuss on the exam day. But it's coming back to, there are lots of factors that overlap with different areas, and you've got to really pivot when it comes to applying the pre-seen materials to the scenario on the exam day. There are other PESTEL and SWOT analysis points and opportunities, along with the small hint of Porter's 5 forces factor there when it talked about the new entrance to the market. Lower margins actually more likely, where we're told from a perspective of what they should be making moving forward. Most of the focus is going to be on those sort of mass-produced, lower costing products because people have got less disposable income. But then the flip side of that is about landfills, being biodegradable, greenhouse gases. So again, the hints are there of a potential PESTEL style question. We've got lots of environmental and some social factor points in this part of the pre-seen materials about employment protection and how the shoes are made in the production process. We're also told on there about Parish, so choosing instead more expensive shoe manufacturers like Parish, and this is where that's their unique selling point that we need to be aware of to say, well, you get the impression that Darren Shoes Limited needs to really look at its strategy in a bit more detail, and therefore I think the application of one of these theories is a potential on your exam day. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, but there are a few hints, especially on that slide. There are other environmental factors about how we're actually getting those shoes to and from the customers. And this is where the cost is not actually put onto the customer. So it will need to be absorbed by Darren Shoes Limited, but it's going to be squeezing the potential margins on there. But again, linking it back to that environmental impact of the industry, it adds concerns, and customers are more likely to go from an ethical point of view seller. We then come on to innovation and development. We're told, again, a key company name to make sure you've got written down is a company called Kind Shoes Co. And this is the only time that we are told about this company, where they have growing environmental awareness, interest in an ethical and sustainably sourced products on there, developed by ethical shoes. It's linking into those ethical points that we touched on earlier. How could you apply ethics back to the scenario? And this could be one of your points. We're also told about the SWOT analysis. as well. And that is another PESTEL factor that you can see there. So annoyingly, it's just gone over the writing, but I can tell you now it's an environmental factor about recycling initiatives. So recycling initiatives are being trialled by a number of manufacturing countries, but there are yet to be a significant development in the area of Luckland. So again, something to be aware of from a SWOT analysis opportunity. Maybe Darren Shoes Limited could go down that route of being a sustainable and environmentally friendly point of view in terms of attracting new customers. The only thing to go with that, if you have a look on page 9, in terms of the officers that we have in the organization who are in charge, there is nobody in charge of the environment or sustainability actually in the officers or on the board of directors. So who is accountable for this could be a really big point. If you were to mention an environmental or sustainability point, if it was being tested on the exam day. There are a few more hints in terms of innovation and developments from a PESTEL analysis point of view. We're told about technology factors involving 3D printing, intelligent shoes where you can get people to try them on using their smartphones on there. And then this is where, from a technology point of view, you've got to think about the sort of legal sides of it from a PESTEL analysis point of view, that what if there was a data breach, or what if there was an issue with the application of using smartphone technology and transmitting data. Customers can design and personalize it. It sounds fantastic, leveraging technology being a unique selling point. But on the other side, you've got to kind of think worst case scenario, and what if there was an issue here? Next, we're looking at the industry body and standards and legislation. More PESTEL factors here from a political point of view. And there is a key factor and key point for you to get down, which is this accredited manufacturer mark that customers look for, which if you apply it to products that they show quality, safety of products, labour standards, we actually know that Darren Shoes Limited have this MIL or Made in Luckland standard that is applied if you go to page 10 to the formal type of shoes. These are the handmade shoes. So again, you've got that accredited manufacturer badge and mark. Why don't Darren Shoes Limited just focus on formal shoes actually made in Luckland and specialize in that area? Again, could come down to a sort of strategic point of view kind of requirement. But there is that other Made in Luckland campaign that was set up by the LSA to promote Luckland manufactured shoes. So the next and final possible area here from a legal factor, make sure you get down that Luckland Shoe Association. That is all about where we have on here protecting members with their expertise, advice and guidance, and links to the Luckland government that you go to yourself, well, another political factor that could bring in the government and the application of the theory. Other areas, which again, oh gosh, there's lots of PESTEL on here, isn't there? Gosh, I know I'm not meant to be predicting, but there were just so many things that sort of stood out when you're looking at different social and legal factors. Again, we're told about data protection legislation, copyright potential issues, risk of lawsuits and fines. And lastly, we're given a actual national shoe union that looks after members and their pay and conditions, so could overlap to an ethics kind of style question, or linking into corporate governance, how the staff are actually looked after. However, to caveat that and to go against the point, if you were to have a look on page 12, you can see at the bottom that staff satisfaction in the actual company of Darren Shoes Limited has a rating in 2004 of 8.2, whereas the industry average in 2004 is 7.2. It's one of the values that Darren Shoes Limited have had lots of employees who have been at the company for a long time. And so again, it's something just to balance your arguments out that there are positives out there for Darren Shoes Limited. So speaking of Darren Shoes Limited, we've got to then think about, if you were to close your eyes and not fall asleep, obviously thinking about the SBL exam on there, it's a case of what comes to your mind when you think of Darren Shoes Limited that you should have to mind come the exam day. Well, the first key thing is about, as we've talked about before, founded nearly 100 years ago, so it's well established. It's got a good brand image that it's built on, reasonably priced, well made. And then the key bit from a strategy change point of view is that 15 years ago, the manufacturing was taken out of Luckland and moved overseas to a country called Totland on there. So this is where they use a third party called ACCA Limited. That's Totland's largest shoe manufacturer. And then they bring in the mass-produced shoes back into Luckland once they are produced. So they're taking advantage of the lower costs as a result to produce the goods. There is the key name to get down there of Dearn. So that is the founder on there. It's the only time we're told of that name. So again, are they the only shareholder? It's very hard to tell, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And the other key thing is that Darren Shoes Limited, it was one of the first organizations to have that mill mark for its formal type of shoe. So it's kind of what it is renowned for. When it comes to the shipping of those mass-produced shoes now, so in other words, to get them from Totland back into Luckland, they use a third-party carrier called DT Global Transit, and they are very, very good. They are praised within the actual pre-seen information. So it's well worth noting that down on there, that they've got that right in terms of it. And you can see that positive note on page 8, where we're told that it's DT and the service levels are excellent. And with the opportunity of external or exporting the products, you kind of think to yourself, well, maybe a good point to use there would be that why don't we use DT Global Transit for more international exports on there? We trust them already. We already work with them. In terms of a last point on here from a SWOT analysis point of view, it directly states that it does not export any of its production. So from an export point of view and new markets and increasing revenue streams, that's where we have 75 branded retail outlets and its website, but new revenue streams actually exporting the products and utilizing maybe DT Global Transport could be a viable option. In terms of the ownership now, looking at Dearn's shares, it's split on here from the founder's family, but we're not told how many family members are involved. And then the directors, which we'll come on to in a moment, have 15%, with the employment having 10% and other having 5%. So in terms of ownership, this links into things like agency theory, linking to the mission, vision, and values you can find on page 12. And this is where the key bit for your notes is that the Dearn founding family don't have any involvement in the management of the organization. So the driver of the mission, vision, and values are all the directors. They are in charge. So if anything goes wrong, that is who we are looking at. Dearn is not listed on the Luckland Stock Exchange. We're told hints about corporate governance arrangement, that they are consistent. But again, if something goes wrong with corporate governance that leads to bad performance, the executive chair on page 9 is accountable for this. It's also worth bearing in mind that Dearn Limited, or Darren Shoes Limited, should I say, is not a listed company. It does not have an audit, nomination, or remuneration committees. However, for context, it has revenue of $352.5 million. We see that on page 12. So this is where we've got an internal audit team who reports to the chief financial officer. But you've kind of got to say, we could have some internal control issues here. And there are areas that, as you can see on page 9, it sounds like the directors are pretty comfortable in that they've worked at Dearn for over 20 years. They don't like to change things, hard to challenge what they do. And they seem pretty comfortable that maybe they don't want to take on board getting listed and to grow the company because of being more hassle. But we could get that on the exam day that they are to become listed. And that is where one of the theories, such as the 3 E's, could come into play and for you to apply it to the scenario. We then come on to actually those key stakeholders we touched on at the start. So an absolute must that you know all about those. We're talking about staff turnover is low. Lots of staff don't like to leave, consistent with the staff satisfactions that we see on page 12. And in terms of the brand reputation now, well, this is the key bit, again, where mistakes are going to be made. The relationship between Dearn and XCO, so XCO are the company that make the mass-produced products now out of Luckland. So this is what that strategic change was 15 years ago. It was all going well, but sadly in the last 2 years, there have been a few issues about quality, poor production quality, number of returns. It's not sounding pretty ideal, and therefore could link into a weakness from a SWOT analysis point of view, and definitely something you should be looking at to include in a requirement so that you discuss what is going on in the scenario effectively. In terms of the board and organizational structure now, it was really interesting to see that we aren't given a single name provided for any of those executive directors or officers on there. And we're actually not also given any information on the experience, familiarity, or expertise of the non-executive directors. So question and put out that professional skepticism of, do they actually know anything about making shoes? Have they worked in organizations in Luckland or overseas? These are the sort of things that you should be posing based on the pre-seen materials. In terms of the actual organizational structure now and accountability, in other words, what areas are they looking after? You can see on here, nobody is accountable for environmental factors or sustainability, which has come up quite a lot in the pre-seen materials. So definitely worth noting down as to who is accountable and who should be accountable. Furthermore, coming on to the board and organizational structure now in a bit more detail, this is where to wrap your head around those directors who have worked for Dearn Limited for over 20 years. They've built up good relationships, really positive. They sound like they're all sort of working collaboratively together. But to be honest with you, they sound pretty comfortable in their positions, very risk adverse, and they're really focused on the day-to-day operations that the business sort of just ticks along efficiently and effectively, and not very strategic minded. So again, from a exam style question, how could it relate to other areas? Well, we're not given any KPIs in the pre-seen materials. Possibly, and a requirement on the exam day could link to how this business is going to be from a strategic point of view and applying theories that could link into it on there. They've also told us that Dearn is a functional and top-down sort of hierarchical structure. And that, in a nutshell, is where the senior leadership team make the decisions and then the subordinates down below comply, which seems to be a nicely run process. In terms of the products that we have now, ACCA won't thank me on this, but there was a small typo on there for Dearn. But hey-ho, we digress on that in case they want me to review any of their materials. Page 10, Dearn is struggling to engage with the casual shoe market. I think they've just overdone it with them doing far too much. They're not adopting their styles quickly enough. So maybe one of your points is that you should actually recommend that Dearn actually pull out of some of these markets and just focus on a smaller amount of shoe types. You'll see on there that they've got things like color, height of heel, but the bit on here, Dearn produces 20 different styles for each type of shoe. That is a lot of shoes and a lot of styles. So again, something to really hit home about if you're asked to talk about the type of product, the industry, and just being really specific as to, is it handcrafted or is it mass produced? As Dearn actually, as we know, manufactures all 4 types. That is the key point. And where we talked about those key names and competition, let me pull it up here. So this is from the table that we have actually on page, which one is it? Page 10. So Parrish is the main competitor for formal. In terms of semi-formal, Dearn is the market leader, closely behind Bettersby. We're also told about Rego is the market leader for casual shoes, but again, they're sort of very cheaper. And they've talked about the demographic and the target market there. But the other interesting one is that one you can see at the bottom, Tiptoe, another competitor only mentioned once in the pre-seen materials, all about children's shoes, mass produced, but something to be aware of, that it's really from a retail outlet perspective and linked to reputation. But I still think the opportunity is in the formal shoes. These are handcrafted. They have that mill mark you can see on there, higher margins. And it even says on here that we have that Parish also charges a higher price than Dearn. So room for greater margins. We're coming on to now the manufacturing and sales process. More SWOT analysis here for opportunities for online sales and utilizing what they currently have got. In terms of dropping year on year, have a look at page number 12 there. In terms of what we're looking at there, is the customer satisfaction. So customer service is one of the things that they really pride themselves on, but it's decreasing year on year. And is it now relating to the manufacturing process and the sales processes that we have in place? So we're actually given a little diagram about the different stages, how it's designed, how it's sold, and that key percentage on there that they currently only have 12% total of Dearn sales are linked to online sales. So again, that could really be pushed up, and especially from an export point of view. It's really key on this diagram to get your head around it, because the sort of colouring doesn't help. That's why myself and the Learnsignal team have asked about the sort of different bits of referencing, but it's also about understanding who's involved. So you've got DT and Luckland on there. It overlaps with different areas. So the shoe manufacturing and retail process is back on page 2. That is also where you'll find section 2. But the interesting bit on here is you can see we've got the sort of research design. We've also got the manufacturing processes. Have a look back at those board of directors and the officers to see who is accountable for which particular area. And it's one of those things on the exam day, when you're reading through the requirements, you've got a picture in your head, what part of the process is it relating to, and who is accountable for that particular area. We're also told about information systems, another use of technology from a PESTEL point of view. And if anything goes wrong with anything to do with technology on your exam day, it's page 9. The Chief Information Officer is accountable for this area. There's been a lot of capital expenditure versus revenue expenditure on there. So applying your accounting terminology, but they've really linked it to an off-the-shelf finance and human resource systems area, and the key bit here is that it a new inventory system was recently introduced, but it does not provide the transparency that Dearn needs for its supply chain. So you go straight the way. It's not fit for purpose. It's not telling us everything that we need, and therefore we really need to look into that in a bit more detail. Coming on to the last bits now of the pre-seen materials, do not overlook these areas. They love to test mission, vision, and values. Quote them directly if it comes up in a requirement. And in terms of risk management, where we're given that risk register, the Chief Finance Officer on page 9 is the person accountable. We've got environmental impact on there, quality, product recalls, massively important. The customer experience is declining. We'll see that on the next slide. So that is where the mission is not being put into practice effectively. From a values perspective, they are focusing on the staff. However, the quality of the products and services, again, we'll see in a moment, is dropping year on year. So Dearn's board are risk adverse to decision making. They need to make some decisions. Otherwise, it could bring into question the sustainability of the business moving forward. Now, looking at the pre-seen materials, make sure you don't make the mistake of getting the figures mixed up or seeing that industry average. It relates to 2004 of Dearn on the right-hand side. And that's where you can see my little X's and ticks as to, are Dearn in a better or worse situation, how they've been progressing from the 5 different areas. The standout one is that customer satisfaction. It's been dropping year on year, along with the market share. So the board of directors have got to do something about this from their point of view. The margins are still pretty healthy and the staff satisfaction as well. But purely from is the business from a financial perspective looking good moving forward, there is room for improvement. Whew, deep breath, everyone. And if you have your phone out now, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen for the contents on the Learnsignal platform.